Detective Emily Harper had been looking forward to her break. After her last harrowing case, she needed a breather, somewhere far from the urban sprawl, the paperwork, and the constant demands of her job. So when a friend mentioned a quiet little coastal town called Cliff's Edge, with its misty beaches and quaint shops, Emily packed her bags and drove up the winding roads leading there, hoping for nothing more than some solitude and a good book. The town was as peaceful as promised, nestled between towering cliffs and a rocky shore. She stayed at a small inn, run by an elderly couple, who were warm but reserved. Emily noticed the town had a somber, almost reverent quiet to it. Everyone seemed to speak in hushed tones, as if fearing to wake something sleeping in the shadows. But she brushed it off as small-town charm. On her second night, the first scream pierced the stillness. It was midnight when she heard it, a long, heart-wrenching wail that seemed to echo down the narrow streets, carrying a sorrow so deep it chilled Emily to the bone. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear where it came from. The scream died off into the night, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The next morning, she walked to the small coffee shop near the town square. The locals murmured in corners, their faces ashen, avoiding eye contact. Emily noticed how even the children seemed subdued, clutching their mother's hands tightly. Did anyone else hear something strange last night? Emily asked the barista as she paid for her coffee. The woman's face darkened, and she quickly looked away, mumbling, "It was nothing, just the wind." But Emily had been a detective long enough to know fear when she saw it. She glanced around, watching people hurry by, faces tight with worry. Clearly, the wind was more than just a weather phenomenon. That night, as Emily lay in bed, the scream came again. It started as a faint whimper, like someone trying to hold back tears, then rose, long and mournful, until it crescendoed into an agonized wail. Emily's instincts kicked in, and she threw on her coat, grabbed her flashlight, and headed out into the night. The streets were empty, but she could feel a strange weight in the air, a sense of dread so thick it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The scream seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at once, and as she walked, the wind picked up, swirling the fog around her. She shivered, gripping the flashlight tighter, following the sound through the winding streets, until she found herself on the edge of the cliff overlooking the sea. There, silhouetted against the moonlight, she saw a figure, a woman draped in tattered, flowing clothes, her hair wild and blowing in the wind. Her back was turned, but Emily felt the intensity of her grief as if it were her own. She knew instantly that this wasn't a living woman. The figure seemed translucent, a part of the mist itself. The woman let out another wail, the sound piercing through Emily's skull, filling her with a pain so sharp she stumbled backward. She tried to cover her ears, but the scream tore through her defenses, sinking into her mind, filling her with visions she didn't understand, images of sorrow, loss, and rage. Then just as suddenly as she'd appeared, the figure vanished, leaving only the sound of the crashing waves below. The next morning, Emily returned to the coffee shop, determined to get answers. She spotted an older man sitting alone in the corner, nursing a black coffee and looking like he hadn't slept in days. She introduced herself, mentioning the figure she'd seen by the cliff. His face went pale, and he muttered, "So you've seen her too." He introduced himself as Thomas, a retired fisherman who'd lived in Cliff's Edge all his life. He told her about the town's legend, the story of a spirit who haunted the cliffs. Years ago, he said, his voice low. "A young woman lived here, a girl named Aileen. She was deeply in love, and they say she was engaged to a sailor. But one night, during a terrible storm, he went out to sea and never returned. Some say he drowned. Others say he abandoned her for another woman. Aileen was inconsolable, and she waited on those cliffs every night hoping he'd come back." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "One night she threw herself off the cliff. They say her spirit returned, cursed to cry out in warning whenever a death is near. Her wail is the sound of grief that never found peace. And once you've heard her cry, it means that someone close by is doomed." Emily felt a chill run through her. This was no mere ghost story. The fear etched on his face was real. That night, Emily stayed up, watching the cliff from her window. Midnight came and went, and for a while there was nothing but silence. Then faintly, she heard it again, that terrible, haunting cry. She watched as the figure of Aileen appeared on the cliff, her silhouette twisting in agony. But this time, there was something different. Aileen's cries grew louder, more intense, and Emily could feel something shifting in the air. It was as if Aileen's pain was building, reaching a breaking point. She wasn't just wailing in grief, she was warning someone. Emily felt a sudden urgency, an unshakable feeling that she needed to help Aileen somehow, to understand what the spirit wanted. As she approached the cliff, Emily called out, "Aileen, I know you're hurting. Tell me how I can help you find peace." The woman's figure turned slowly, her eyes hollow and filled with endless sorrow. Emily felt herself drawn into the spirit's gaze, trapped in a vision of Aileen's last moments. A dark night, a churning sea, the image of a ship sinking below the waves. And then, the woman's voice, as clear as if she were alive, echoed in her mind. "He's still out there, lost. I cannot rest." Emily shivered, but she didn't turn away. "Aileen, if I help you, will you let this town go? Will you stop haunting them?" Aileen nodded slowly, her form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. The next day, Emily asked around about the shipwreck, and after some digging, she found a record of an old vessel that had gone down just off the coast. The wreckage, believed to be lost in the depths, had never been recovered. Determined to put Aileen's spirit to rest, Emily contacted a local fisher and arranged an expedition to the wreck site. That afternoon, they set out in a small boat. The water was choppy, and the skies were gray, casting an ominous pall over the sea. As they neared the coordinates of the wreck, Emily felt a strange pull, almost as if something was guiding her. The divers descended, and after what felt like an eternity, they surfaced, holding a small, rusted locket. Inside was a picture of Aileen and her lover, faded but still visible. Emily held it in her hands, feeling the weight of the woman's sorrow. That night, she returned to the cliffs and placed the locket on the edge, whispering, "Aileen, he's here now. You're not alone anymore." The wind picked up, and she heard a faint, almost gentle sigh, like a breath of relief. The figure appeared one last time, her face softened, the lines of grief fading. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Aileen's form dissolved into the mist, leaving only a peaceful silence. The town, once filled with whispers and fear, was finally free of her cries, and as Emily left Cliff's Edge, she knew that even in death, love and loss held a power that could echo across the ages. But sometimes, all it took was someone to listen to, bring peace to the restless. Emily's vacation had turned out to be anything but restful. Yet as she drove away, from the little town, she felt a strange sense of calm, as if by helping Aileen, she'd also lightened some unspoken burden she carried herself. And in the silence, she found something rare, a moment of understanding that the line between the living and the dead was not as clear as most would believe.